Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a single brewer, single style, but slightly different sub-styles. If you've seen a lot of our reviews, you may already have a guess of where these from just by seeing the cans here. But today we're going to be reviewing a couple different IPAs by Anchorage Brewing Company. Specifically a double followed up by a triple IPA. Anchorage Brewing is of course based in Anchorage, Alaska. This first beer that we're going to review is called Medusa. This is a double dry hopped hazy IPA double that clocks in at 8.4% ABV. For number two, this is called Shape Shift Black. It's a triple IPA that's 2% higher, so 10.4% ABV. So I've had a lot of beers from Anchorage Brewing Company, a lot of different styles, and everything I've had has been fantastic. I've had probably 10 or 15 different beers that they brewed thus far. If you're wondering to yourself, hey, I've never seen Anchorage Brewing anywhere, where can I get that? Well, if you don't live in Alaska, the only way you can get your hands on these is through Tavour. They are their only out-of-state distributor, as it were. So if you need just one more reason to finally check out Tavour, this is it. Anchorage Brewing Company, they are brewing some world-class beers up there, have won tons of awards, and rightfully so. So without further ado, we're going to jump into today's Anchorage Brewing Company IPA review, starting with the double of the bunch. This is Medusa, that clocks in at 8.4% ABV. Okay, so jumping into the first beer of today's Anchorage Brewing Company IPA review, we have got Medusa, which is a double dry hopped hazy double IPA that clocks in at 8.4% ABV. Anchorage Brewing Company is of course based in Anchorage, Alaska. So starting with the label art, they always have really neat label art. This one's called Medusa, and it's got an interesting, it's not exactly Medusa in the traditional sense, but it's got Medusa-like qualities to it. So it's got a skull with a bunch of other random branching skulls coming off of it. I'm hoping the camera's picking that up. It looks awesome. They always have great can art. But without further ado, we're going to get this cracked gently. All right. Pour it right in our big old glass here. All right. As I'm pouring this, yeah, this looks more or less what I expected. This is kind of the prototypical IPA color. They can run in a wide range of colors, but this is the most typical, that light pale yellow. This one had no problem forming a head whatsoever. I could tell you, as I was pouring it, I could smell it quite clearly, and it smells very bright and fruity, as you would expect from a hazy. And yeah, there's definitely a little haze here, but it's got a beautiful color. In terms of carbonation, it's pretty active. It looks like a mix of very small, fine, and slightly larger, medium, small size bubbles, forming a nice pillowy head here on top. That is crystal clear. Let's get down for a closer sniff. Oh yeah, that smells like hoppy fruit juice is really what it reminds me most of. There's a lot of citrus happening. There's a lot of orange. There's a lot of grapefruit, a slight suggestion of lemon, and there's some underlying tropical as well. Pineapple, it's a aroma that comes through a lot on IPAs, and it's a flavor that comes through a lot in IPAs. This one definitely has it. So there's this blend of citrus and pineapple. There's some berry-like aromas in here as well. It does smell a little like blueberry. Now, I don't know the hop bill on this, which I like to know on IPAs because it's rather critical. But if I were betting, I would guess that this definitely has some mosaic in it because it is one of the few hop varieties that does impart that distinct blueberry aroma as well as some flavor character traits. Now, in tandem with the big, bold, ripe, juicy, fruity side of this beer, there's also an underlying hoppiness to it. And it smells very West Coast style to me. It's got this kind of pine, resiny side, as well as just a little bit of earthy. So those are the big aromas that are coming through, and it is quite pungent. It smells very nice, and it's quite a bold aroma. So this head has settled down a decent bit. Let's just jump right in. Oh yeah. Oh, that's nice. That's a very nice beer. Okay, so the flavors that come through, the first thing you get up front is not exactly what you get on your average double IPA, nor is it what you get on your average hazy or hazy double IPA. There is this burst and suggestion of fruitiness, and there are definitely some fruit-like characteristics that are coming through, but there's a big wallop of the underlying standard kind of hop characteristics. Like what I smelled, that earthiness, that kind of pine and resinous, that comes through equally as bold for that first second. So it's like 50-50 fruit, hop, you know, kind of earthy and resinous, and then the balance skews way in favor of the kind of bittering side, that earthy bitter side, that hoppy resinous bitter side, and then kind of the fruit qualities kind of dial back. So it jumps up to about 2/3 to a 1/3 ratio. You know, bitters, earthiness, resinous, it's kind of fruity. But it's very, very nice. You don't get that often in a hazy, and you certainly don't get that big, bold intensity all that often in a double either. In terms of pungency, overall pungency of bitters, this is more bitter forward than your average hazy, to be certain. And I would go so far as to say it's more bitter than your average double IPA. I don't often go for IPAs outside of just a standard IPA, because here's what happens. We've talked about this a lot, but just to refresh, once you start adding in extra malts, which are required to boost up the ABV of your beer, that's where the sugars are coming from that the yeast is eating and converting into alcohol. That extra volume of malt just starts to overpower the hops. So there's really not much you could do about it other than just hopping the crap out of the beer, both in the boil, and indeed if you want the aroma side, you would do it with dry hopping on the back end. The problem with that is there comes a point in a beer, IPAs obviously are most prone to this, where you hop to the point that you're not going to get really anything extra in terms of bitters, in terms of really nice flavors, and it can start to gum up and funk up the beer. And I would say, I would just hazard a guess that the average consumer wouldn't like that. Now, I brewed some like that as experiments at home, and yeah, they were over the top, but I did still enjoy them. Are they funky? Yeah. Do they really extract a lot of bitters? Yes, they do. It's relatively simple to do. It just does take a lot more volume, but that also drives up price. So what they've done here with this one is struck a really fantastic balance in how they built the malt bill, the exact hops they used, how much they put into the boil at the different points in time, as well as their dry hopping to get these big aromas. And of course it's a hazy, so that makes it all the more impressive to me. You don't often get that either in a double or a hazy, and they've done it in both. And bravo, well done Anchorage yet again. So there was a lot happening there, and I was talking a lot about what I was experiencing and the kind of how and why behind it. So I'm going to jump back in for another sip, explore this body and mouthfeel and this finish and overall balance again. Body on this one is a solid medium. It teeters on medium heavy, but it's leaning more towards medium than medium heavy. It's a double IPA, but 8.4, that's not outlandish. I would expect a little more substance from the body, but it's not off by much. The mouthfeel, on the other hand, has a lot more life to it than I anticipated. Hazies do typically have a little bit more resistance, a little more natural viscosity in my experience, but 8.4 again for a double, this is not that ridiculously high of an ABV range, but that mouthfeel is incredible. It feels very much exactly what you would expect if it's sitting flat in the mouth, like no agitation for a standard IPA. But once you start to agitate even the slightest bit, you can really feel all of this incredible resistance. It's very thick. And when you agitate around the palate, it does thicken up even further. So the mouthfeel on this in particular is very, very impressive. In terms of what's happening on the finish, this one does not have a super long finish to it. Really what you're left at the end is a combination of a couple of flavors. And it's essentially this slight citrusy paired with this slight suggestion of pineapple, and then this nice mix of underlying slightly resinous hop qualities as well as earthy hop qualities. So it's very balanced on the end of the finish, and that's really kind of how the flavor profile peaks from the time you first sip to swallow and how the flavor develops on that curve. It's a very big rush up, and then it kind of diverts. So the fruit qualities start to nosedive while the hop qualities are increasing and then holding steady, and then they kind of drop off. Now, it's not the longest finish in the world, but it's longer than I certainly expected on a hazy. Even more so being that it's a double hazy, because doubles, just the hops tend to get lost. They tend to get muddled in the mix of the beer bill. But this one's very well done. They were not shy about their hop use, and it really did pay off because it feels like a proper IPA. This is impressive for an IPA. It's very impressive for a Hazy Double IPA. I'm a big fan of this one. Big fan of this one. In terms of the balance they struck between the hops, where and when and how much they used of each version, and the malt bill is really, really great. There is an underlying sense of maltiness to it, but IPAs are big, bold, pungent, flavorful beer experiences. This is no different. And they added in hops to the level that is indeed the star of the show, as it should be for an IPA, but it doesn't mean that you can't detect anything from this malt bill. It's got a very classic, light roasting edge to it that just adds this underlying breadth to the beer. It's kind of like the bread upon which all the other ingredients are layered. You know, think of the beer and the hops and all that. That's kind of the juice of the meat, or the gravy on top of the grain bread. I know that's probably a weird analogy, but that's kind of how I'm picturing it in my head. And it's very, very nice. Overall, I am very impressed with this beer. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review. That is Shape Shift Black, the Triple IPA that clocks in at 10.4% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's review. This is Anchorage Brewing Company's Shape Shift Black. This is a Triple IPA, clocks in at a bit higher ABV at 10.4%. In terms of label art on this one, it's got a wolf with a skull in its mouth and a little crescent moon above its head. Hopefully I'm getting that close enough to the camera lens for you to pick that up. Yet again, it looks really neat. Their label art is always awesome. I don't know who does it, if they do it in-house, but theirs are always cool looking. But let's get this one cracked gently. Gently. Okay, pour it right in the glass. Okay, so I'm pouring this one. This looks actually not as dark as I anticipated. Very much a nice golden yellow color, which is quite a bit lighter than I anticipated for a triple. But, you know, IPAs, depending on any of their sub-style, sub-categorization, they can really run the full gamut and array of colors. I mean, obviously there's black IPAs, there's red IPAs. I'm just thinking strictly in the standard IPA range. Now, before I even lift this up, I can tell you the aroma on this is incredibly pronounced. Again, about a foot and a half from this beer, and I can smell it crystal clearly. It does smell amazing. First things first, visually, you know, I would say that this is a hazy triple. So we had a hazy double, and now we've got a hazy triple. And it is. It's a very bright, kind of golden yellow color, not dissimilar to the color of a glass of orange juice. It looks really delicious. It poured a pretty nice creamy head on top, maybe not quite as ridiculously thick and silky creamy as the first one, but it did form a good job, and I don't see a ton of activity of it collapsing here. There's not a massive rush of carbonation running in from underneath, so maybe what's left there will left standing. So let's give it a sniff. Yeah, that smells delicious. Overwhelmingly on this one, it smells like fruit. I'm not picking up a ton of direct kind of other hop aromas. It's dominant fruit. It almost smells like a mix of mangoes and papayas. Just chopped up mangoes and papayas together. Maybe some other kind of melon. Yeah, there's a slight melony undertone, but I wouldn't say it's any specific melon. Just kind of a generic melon aroma to go with the mango and papaya. That's the dominant. There's a little bit of a citrusy aroma, and in this one, it's slight grapefruit. That's really what's coming through. So overall, very bright, very fruity, very pronounced aroma. So let's just dive right in and see what this one's about. Ooh. Oh, that's a big beer. That's a big beer. That's packing a lot of flavor. Yet again, I'm going to say, coming back to the intensity of flavor and the intensity of hop flavor and indeed bitters, I'm really quite impressed. If anything, surprisingly, this one is even a bit more bitter forward, though it hits kind of on the back end dominantly because those fresh, fruity flavors that you're picking up in the aroma, they do translate in the glass in this one. That's big and bold, and that hits and kind of intensifies over the course of about 4 or 5 seconds, and it starts to slowly dive off. Once that 4 or 5 seconds hits, that's when you really start to notice the bitters, and they slowly, as the fruit's kind of going down, the bitters continue to rise up, like in intensity, roughly every second, until it hits kind of its peak intensity right around the 10-12 second mark. It's really a slow creep on the bitters, but they really do linger in the back of the throat. The finish on this is quite long, and it is indeed coming from the bitters. I could tell you it's yet again kind of a mix of an earthy hop bitter as well as a slight resinous hop bitter. I would say that the resinous notes are a little more pronounced on this one. This really does put me in mind of a West Coast style bill, and for a triple, I mean, that's the way to do it. It's got this big, bold intensity of bitters on the back, so you're getting a lot more bang for your buck in each sip. But it's being a hazy, it's still letting all these bright, fresh, fruity accents come up front. So it kind of is a little bit of a Jekyll and a Hyde beer. You know, it's all fruit. That starts to die away. Then all of a sudden, here come the bitters, here come the bitters. And it's kind of crazy, the peak of intensity. And then especially on the end of the finish, I did not expect it to linger around on the palate that long, but it really, really does. This is a really good one. Similar to what I said on the double, I'm legitimately even more impressed on a triple. Even a standard triple IPA, let alone a hazy, they tend to get so over-concentrated with malt that the hops just get lost in it. That is not the case here. The hops are the star of the show, and they're big and they're bold and present. I am very, very pleased with this one. Very pleased. This is ranking easily in the best triples I've ever had. No question about it. I never would have expected that much hop intensity of flavor and bitters, to be certain, to come through in a triple IPA. It's a rare thing for that to be the case, and this absolutely did it. Anchorage Brewing Company yet again. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel, explore this flavor development and the balance here. Body on this is a solid medium heavy, bordering on heavy. 10.4% ABV. That's a pretty high ABV, but it's not outlandish. The body, if anything, is even a bit more robust than I would have anticipated for that ABV range. The mouthfeel, again, sitting static in the mouth, feels like an IPA should. No surprises there. But the instant you start to get any kind of undulation on the palate, any kind of coating, any kind of movement at all, you realize just how incredibly thick and incredibly viscous this one is. This is like big milkshake IPA territory thickness. It's really impressively huge, and it pairs perfectly with that massive body. Body and mouthfeel are fantastic on this beer. It's got absolute breadth. I can tell you on second sip, all the flavors I got on the first are really intensifying. And it's really just an impressive triple IPA here. I got to tell you, the balance struck. The balance, for me, there is an underlying maltiness to this one, and it's kind of the similar format that I got in the first. It's just a classic, crisp, light IPA formula. Nothing funky. It's got the right amount of a malty character that adds this kind of underlying grainy quality to it, but it's not getting in the way of the hops. And that's readily apparent in this beer. This is really a hop lovers, a hop heads triple. I know many other fellow craft beer fans I know that are fellow hopheads, they kind of agree with me for the same reason. They typically go just for a standard IPA when they want one, because doubles, triples, quads, you never really know what you're going to get, and 9 times out of 10 the hops are going to get lost. That is not the case here. Whatever they did to extract that base amount of hop characteristic into this, both in terms of all the fruity kind of characters they're bringing to the table, as well as the typical hop bitters, they really nailed it. I mean, this is just tremendously delicious. I wish you could taste this. I know you're going to have to take my word for it, but believe me, it's all in there. In terms of really what I'm getting in flavor components, I mentioned that the aroma more or less matches the flavor profile, which you don't always get, but it does happen in this one. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to finish topping this off, just that last little bit I didn't get there in the beginning. I'm just going to take one more sip just to make sure I'm getting kind of the fruit I'm tasting right. It's definite citrus dominant. So it doesn't exactly match the aroma. It's very much citrus dominant. It's got grapefruit, orange, and lemon kind of in tandem, and it's a lot of different varieties of grapefruit and oranges. I would go so far as to say same thing for lemon. There's almost like a Meyer lemon side to it as well, just like there's standard orange, and then there's very much a blood orange vibe in there. There's a little bit of a tangerine, obviously they're related. And then for the grapefruit, there's an element that tastes just like a standard white grapefruit. There's definitely an element of ruby red, and there's a whole lot of that citrus oil from the skin, that rind quality. And that's really where, once the bitters start to roll out, that's where they're coming out of. And there is this dominant earthy bitterness to it, and the citric bitterness to it, and this really resinous and pine-like bitterness to it. This really reminds me most closely of a West Coast style IPA formula, and it's incredibly well done. For a triple, I mean, on each subsequent sip, I'm just trying to think if I've ever had a triple I've enjoyed this much. I don't think the answer is so. I think that this probably could be the best triple IPA I've ever had. It's just incredible. If you're a lover of all things hop and really appreciate all the hop characteristics and not just aromas but flavors coming through in the beer, especially in these higher, the double, triple, quad kind of IPA territory, and also letting the bitters come through and have their own voice, this is definitely one to seek. I am absolutely impressed. Just bravo. Bravo, Anchorage Brewing. Tremendous. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with Anchorage Brewing Company's Medusa. This was the double IPA of the bunch. It was a hazy, double dry hopped, 8.4% ABV on this one. Anchorage Brewing Company, of course, based in Anchorage, Alaska. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this was very pronounced. It was one of those IPAs that you could smell from a very good distance away. And when you got up, just very much typical with a hazy, big notes of bright, fresh fruit, but it also had a nice underlying kind of earthiness and pine resinous quality to it as well. So it had a real nice mix of aromas. Gave it a 9 out of 10. For the taste, I absolutely love the taste on this beer. Frankly, for a hazy and for a double, this was one of the better ones I've ever had, just in terms of what it brought to the table. There was a ton of different flavors that were happening in this beer, but it also had a nice presence of bitters, which you don't often get in doubles and certainly not in hazies. This one was far more kind of leaning in the hop head kind of range of hazies and doubles, though don't get me wrong, this is not as pungently bitter as, say, a standard West Coast style IPA. But for what it was, I was very impressed, and it was absolutely delicious. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, I was a little surprised about the body on this one. A hazy double, at 8.4, you're going to expect it to have a good bit of breadth. Hazies typically do have a little heavier body, a little more viscous mouthfeel naturally, but this one was really just hovering in the high end of average range. It gets a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel The mouthfeel was a totally different story though. What the body lacked in breadth, the mouthfeel was incredibly large and viscous, a ton of resistance, and it still had that classic feel just sitting on the palate, but it helped to counterbalance that little bit less robust body. I gave the mouthfeel a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was certainly longer than average. Most definitely for a hazy, and again, definitely for a double, but it wasn't crazy long. It had a decent bit of bitters that helped push it out, but it wasn't over the top. Above average, it gets a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a really good job for port at home. It really just missed the mark of being absolute tops by just a hair. As it were, I only docked 1 point here. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance on this was essentially exactly what I expected. A hazy double IPA, that's almost the textbook appearance. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exceptional. And I'm talking the balance of all the different hops. Granted, I didn't know the hop bill. It was clear there were a lot of them in there. A lot of different ones that brought a lot of elements to the table. All of those you could pick out independently. The bitters came through clearly and independently. And you got that nice underlying maltiness from the bill that they chose. It was just very well put together. Give it a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the Intangible? Honestly, it's one of the better doubles I've ever had, to be certain. Especially for a hazy, I was very impressed. Subjectively, 10 out of 10 from me. Finally, is an example of the style. Overall, this beer did very well in most categories. It lost a few points in a couple, some more than others, but frankly, I thought this was just a great example of how to piece together a double hazy IPA. Honestly, if every double and or hazy that I got was this well put together, I would probably buy them more often, and that's just a testament to Anchorage Brewing Company's skill. They're really killing it. Overall, it did lose some points, but I only docked 1 here. It gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Anchorage Brewing Company's Medusa to a 90 out of 100. I mean, this is absolutely well above average. Frankly, I really do truly believe it's one of the best doubles, let alone hazy doubles, I've ever had. I absolutely enjoyed it, and it's just another one of these situations. You never know, but I wish I had ordered more. I should start knowing if I'm going to get stuff from Anchorage, I should just get more because they just do a great job. Moving on to beer number 2. This was Shapeshift Black. 10.4% ABV on this one. This was the Triple IPA, so a little bit bigger. In terms of how these compared, it was similar drinking experiences, but I was equally, if not more so, impressed with this one. Starting with the aroma on this one, if anything, was even more pungent. Frankly, a good 1.5 feet, 2 feet away, I could still smell it. All the same characteristics that I got in the first one. Very bright, fresh, ripe fruit, but still this wonderful underlying earthiness and kind of pine and resinous notes came through, as well as all the tropicals and the fruits and florals. It was just wonderful. Aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, if this first one impressed me, this one impressed me even more so. A triple, so it's got even more malts in there, and if anything, this was even more pronounced with how the flavors came through and the bitters as well. I was so shocked by this, and pleasantly so. This was even more bitter forward, and to get that in a triple, just a standard triple IPA, is not common at all. In a triple hazy, I mean, it's kind of unheard of. I have legitimately never enjoyed a triple IPA, let alone a hazy, as much as I did this one. They knocked it out of the park. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this one was huge. 10.4, and it absolutely felt it. It had even more breadth to it than I anticipated. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same story. It was just like the first one, just felt right when it sat on the palate, but you agitated it and you could feel tons of viscosity, tons of resistance, perfectly paired with that big body. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this one was very long. I mean, just absolutely shocked me at how long it was. Granted, it was clear there was a lot more bitters happening in this beer that were going to probably push out that finish. I didn't anticipate it running out as long as it did. And it finished very much with a clear, earthy, and pine resinous bitter just lingered all over the back of the palate with great intensity. 10 out of 10. Head and retention, this one did a good job. Not quite as good as the first, but it wasn't off by much. I docked 2 points here, well above average though. It gets 8 out of 10. For the appearance, yet again, pretty much exactly what I expected for triple IPA hazy. That's what they look like. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, if I was impressed by the balance on the first one, I was even more so by the balance on this one. And this was even more so a Hopheads triple and hazy. The bitters that came through in this were just incredible. I was really shocked at the intensity that came through. And it wasn't just the bitters. It was still very much a hazy recipe. So all of these bright, fresh, ripe fruit that came flooding in, floral quality, citrus, tropical fruit, and still a ton of earthy and resinous bitter underlying. It was phenomenal. It gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the Intangible, I loved it. I wouldn't have changed a thing. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this beer nearly swept it. It lost a couple points in head and retention, but I'm not dinging it. This is how to do a hazy triple. Forget the hazy. It's how to do a hazy. It's how to do a triple. That's the definition of how to do a hazy triple. It gets a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Shapeshift Black to a 98 out of 100. Near beer IPA perfection. Folks, these two absolute home runs of beers. Anchorage Brewing always brings their A game. These are two perfect examples. If you keep hearing me go on about Tavour and Anchorage, you can only get from them. If these aren't perfect case examples of exactly why you ought to just check them out, I don't know what else is. Both phenomenal. If you love IPAs, hazies, the biggers, these you definitely want to get your hands on. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.